The evening began with golden lights glowing softly inside the grand hall. Music floated through the air, laughter mixed with the soft clinking of glasses, and a polished piano sat in one corner, untouched but shining under the warm lights. It was a charity event hosted by one of the biggest companies in the city, an evening meant to celebrate success and give back to the community. The guests were dressed perfectly, their smiles wide and confident, but beneath all the sparkle, there was a quiet sense of formality. Everyone was there to be seen, to network, to impress. At the center table sat the CEO of the company, a man known for his calm authority and strict professionalism. He wasn't the type to show emotions easily. His face carried the kind of composure that came from years of discipline and control. He spoke little, nodded politely, and often checked his phone, answering messages even in the middle of conversations. To many, he was untouchable, successful, powerful, and focused only on numbers and results. As the event went on, a few local students performed small acts, a dance, a short song, and a violin performance. The audience applauded politely each time. Everything was going exactly as planned. But then something unusual happened. A small hand tugged gently at the sleeve of one of the event coordinators near the stage. It belonged to a little girl, probably no more than 8 or 9 years old. She was dressed simply. Her faded yellow dress was neat but clearly not new. She looked nervous, her eyes darting between the stage and the floor as she gathered her courage to speak. "Excuse me," she said softly, almost whispering. "Can I play the piano? It's very urgent." The coordinator blinked, unsure if he heard her correctly. "You want to play the piano?" he asked kindly, glancing at her curious expression. "Yes," she said again. "Please, just one song. It's very urgent." The man smiled awkwardly, assuming she was just being playful. "Oh, sweetheart, tonight's performances are already planned," he explained. "Maybe next time." But she didn't move. Her small hands clutched the edge of her dress tightly, and her eyes glistened with determination. "Please, sir," she said again, her voice trembling slightly. "It's very important. I just need a few minutes." The coordinator didn't know how to respond. The crowd was busy chatting and laughing. No one else seemed to notice the girl except for one person, the CEO, who happened to glance up from his phone at that exact moment. He noticed the child standing there, her anxious posture, her pleading tone. Something about her voice caught his attention. It wasn't loud or demanding, but there was something honest and urgent in it, something that didn't fit the usual tone of the evening. He leaned slightly toward one of the organizers sitting beside him and asked quietly, "What's going on there?" "Oh, it's just a little girl asking to play the piano," the organizer replied with a dismissive wave. "Probably just curious." The CEO looked again. The girl was still standing there, waiting, her eyes fixed on the piano like it was something sacred. He didn't know why, but he felt a strange pull in his chest, a small flicker of curiosity he couldn't explain. "Let her play," he said suddenly. The organizer hesitated, surprised. "Sir? She's not on the list." "It's fine," the CEO interrupted calmly. "Let's see what she wants to play." And just like that, the atmosphere in the room shifted slightly. The lights seemed to dim a little, and the chatter slowed down as the coordinator led the girl toward the stage. The audience turned their heads, wondering what was happening. Some smiled politely, assuming it would be a short, light-hearted moment. The girl walked carefully to the piano. Her shoes made soft sounds on the polished floor, and her small frame looked even smaller under the bright stage lights. She paused for a moment, staring at the keys like she was remembering something. The microphone nearby caught the faint sound of her deep breath before she sat down. For a moment there was silence. The audience waited, expecting maybe a simple tune or a child's song. Even the CEO leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, his expression unreadable. He wasn't sure what he was expecting. Perhaps just a momentary distraction from the formalities of the night. Then the girl placed her fingers gently on the keys and began to play. The first few notes were soft, almost hesitant, but they carried something pure, an emotion that made a few people glance at each other in surprise. The melody wasn't a song anyone recognized right away. It was slow, filled with long pauses, as if each note carried a story of its own. The audience grew quieter, drawn in without realizing it. As she continued, her hands seemed to move with memory more than technique. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was playing from something deep within. Her small body swayed gently with the rhythm, her face calm but focused. Every sound from the piano filled the hall like a whisper from another world. Soft, honest, and heartbreakingly beautiful. The CEO, who had been staring down at the table moments ago, now looked up fully. His eyes followed her fingers as they glided across the keys. The melody stirred something inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. There was something familiar in it, an echo of a memory buried long ago. He couldn't quite place it at first, but as she reached the middle of the piece, a wave of recognition hit him. It was a tune his mother used to hum when he was very young. A lullaby she had composed herself, a tune that always made him feel safe. But he hadn't heard it since she passed away decades ago. He had almost forgotten it existed until now. He felt a lump rise in his throat, his usual composure slipping for a brief second. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, trying to understand how this little girl could possibly know that melody. The people around him seemed to feel it too. The room, once full of polite laughter and chatter, was now utterly silent. A few guests dabbed their eyes quietly. The girl continued to play with a kind of innocence that felt both fragile and powerful at once. When the last note finally faded, she kept her hands on the keys for a moment, her head bowed. The room remained quiet, so quiet that even the soft hum of the air conditioner could be heard. Then, slowly, the audience began to clap. The sound grew louder, rising into warm applause that filled the space. Some stood up, moved by something they couldn't explain. The girl looked up shyly, her eyes wide at the reaction. She gave a small smile, almost uncertain whether she should bow or just step away. Her face turned toward the crowd, scanning the unfamiliar faces, then resting briefly on the CEO, though she didn't seem to realize who he was. The CEO clapped too, though his expression was unreadable. Behind his calm look, his mind was spinning with questions. Who was this girl? How did she know that song? And why had her words, "It's very urgent," sounded so heavy, so filled with meaning? The applause continued until the girl was gently led off the stage by the coordinator. As she stepped down, she turned once more toward the piano, as if leaving something behind. The CEO's eyes followed her quietly, his thoughts far from the cheerful noise of the room. He didn't know why, but something told him this was only the beginning of a story that would change more than just his evening. It would change something deep within him. Later that night, as the event drew to a close and the guests began leaving, the CEO found himself staring again at the empty piano. The sound of the girl's melody lingered in his mind, haunting and beautiful. For a man who lived by logic and order, the feeling unsettled him. He didn't believe in coincidences, yet he couldn't explain the strange connection he felt. As he left the hall, he caught a glimpse of the girl walking out with an older woman who looked like her guardian. They were holding hands, their pace slow and calm. For a brief moment he considered going over to them, asking who they were, maybe saying thank you. But something stopped him. He told himself there would be time later. Yet deep down he felt a quiet unease, as if fate had just opened a door, and he wasn't sure whether he should step through. The night air outside was cool and still. He stood near his car, looking back at the glowing windows of the hall. The music, the applause, and the little girl's trembling voice, all of it replayed in his mind. "Can I play the piano? It's very urgent." He repeated those words softly to himself, not knowing why they felt so heavy now. Somewhere deep inside, a forgotten memory stirred, of a boy sitting beside his mother at an old piano, laughing as she taught him the same tune that little girl had played tonight. And though he didn't understand it yet, something inside him had already begun to change. The next morning began quietly, but the melody from the night before still echoed in the CEO's mind. He sat in his office on the top floor of the glass building, staring out at the city below. His assistant spoke, giving updates about meetings, schedules, and numbers, but he barely heard any of it. His thoughts kept going back to that little girl and the sound of her piano. It had been just a few minutes of music, but something about it refused to fade. He wasn't a man who got distracted easily. In his world, everything followed structure and reason. But that melody had broken through all of that. It had reached a place inside him that logic couldn't touch. It was strange and unsettling, yet it felt important. He opened his laptop, typed a few words, and searched for information about the charity event. There were a few articles online already, photos of smiling guests, the stage, and even one blurred picture of the little girl at the piano. No name, no details, just a caption that said, "A surprise performance by a young guest moved the audience to tears." He leaned back in his chair and exhaled. For a long time, he stared at the photo, as if the answer to his questions was hidden somewhere in that small, brave face. By late afternoon, he called in one of the event organizers. "Do you remember the little girl who played the piano last night?" he asked. The organizer nodded, surprised by the question. "Yes, sir. That was unexpected. Wasn't it? People loved it." "Do we know who she was?" he asked quietly. The man hesitated. "I'm not sure. She wasn't on the guest list. I think she came with a woman who helps with the community school project. They left right after the event." "Find out who she is," the CEO said simply. "And the woman she came with." The organizer nodded, sensing something deeper behind his tone, and left the room immediately. The CEO turned his chair toward the window again. Outside, the city was alive. Cars moving like lines of light, people rushing, phones ringing. Yet in the middle of all that, he felt a rare stillness inside himself. He wasn't sure if it was peace or guilt, but he knew something had shifted. That night, after everyone left the office, he stayed back alone. The building was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. He walked to the corner of his office where an old upright piano stood, something he had kept more for decoration than use. He brushed his hand lightly over the keys, feeling a thin layer of dust. It had been years since he last played, not since his mother died. He sat down, hesitated, and then pressed a few keys. The sound was uneven, but the notes were still there. Slowly, he tried to remember the lullaby, the same one the little girl had played. At first, his fingers fumbled. The rhythm was off, but as he kept playing, the tune began to form, softly, like a whisper returning after years of silence. Memories flooded in, his mother's hands guiding his small fingers, her gentle laughter when he hit the wrong key, the warmth of her voice as she hummed along. He felt his throat tighten. He stopped playing, resting his hands on the keys. He had spent years building an empire, chasing goals, making decisions that changed lives. Yet somehow he had forgotten what that music felt like. Forgotten what it meant to feel something simple and true. That little girl, whoever she was, had brought it all back in a single song. The next day, his assistant brought in a report. "Sir, we found some information about the girl," she said. "Her name is Lily. She's from a local community school funded by one of our charity programs. The woman with her was her teacher. Do you have their contact details?" he asked immediately. "Yes, sir. I can arrange a meeting if you'd like." He nodded. "Tomorrow morning, at my office." The following morning, the teacher and the little girl arrived. The receptionist guided them into the CEO's office. The girl looked around, her eyes wide at the tall shelves, glass walls, and the large wooden desk. She held her teacher's hand tightly. The CEO smiled softly as they entered. "Thank you for coming," he said, standing up to greet them. His voice was calm but carried warmth this time, something even his staff rarely heard. The teacher nodded politely. "Thank you for inviting us, sir." Lily was quite surprised. The girl glanced up at him, shy but curious. "Hello," she said quietly. "Hello," he replied with a small smile. "You played beautifully the other night. Everyone was moved by your music, especially me." Her cheeks turned pink. "Thank you, sir." He studied her face for a moment. "That song you played," he said gently. "Where did you learn it?" She hesitated. "My mother taught me," she answered after a pause. "She used to play it for me every night before she before she went to sleep. The teacher placed a hand on her shoulder, giving her comfort. The girl continued, her voice small but steady. She said it was her favorite song. She told me to never forget it, no matter what. The CEO felt his chest tighten again. He spoke carefully. Do you know where she learned that song? The girl shook her head. She said someone taught it to her a long time ago, when she worked in an office. She didn't say who. Something clicked inside him. He leaned slightly forward, his heart pounding. Do you know where she worked? The girl nodded slowly. At a big company, she said softly. She used to say she worked very hard there, but after some changes, she lost her job. She got sick soon after. The room fell silent. The teacher's expression grew serious, realizing the weight of what the girl was saying. The CEO sat back, his thoughts racing. Could it really be? Could this child's mother have worked for his company? He didn't say anything for a moment. Instead, he looked at the girl again. She wasn't aware of the storm in his mind. She just stood there, clutching her small backpack, looking innocent and calm. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter now. You said it was urgent that night. Why was it so important for you to play? She looked up, her eyes full of sincerity. Because I wanted you to hear it, she said. I didn't know if I'd ever get the chance again. My teacher said you're the one who helps with the school. I thought maybe if you heard my mom's song, you'd remember people like her. The CEO's throat felt dry. People like her? She nodded. People who worked hard but got forgotten. Her words hit him harder than any business loss ever had. For a moment he couldn't speak. The air felt heavy in the room. The teacher shifted slightly, sensing his emotions but saying nothing. He finally took a slow breath. Thank you for telling me, he said softly. And thank you for playing that song. It meant more to me than you can imagine. The girl smiled faintly. I'm glad you liked it. After they left, he sat at his desk for a long time, staring at nothing. He remembered the day of the company merger, the layoffs, the numbers on the screen, the decisions he had justified as necessary. He remembered signing names on a list, hundreds of employees he had never met. To him, it was just part of business. But now, one of those names had a face, a daughter, a song, a story. He stood up, walked over to the window, and looked down at the busy streets below. Cars rushed, people hurried, just like always. But something inside him felt different. He realized how distant he had become from the real people behind the numbers. Later that evening, he found himself once again at the piano in his office. The city lights glowed outside, painting soft reflections across the room. He sat quietly, placed his hands on the keys, and began to play the same lullaby. This time, it wasn't just memory, it was meaning. Each note carried the weight of understanding, regret, and a promise forming deep inside him. He knew what he had to do. The little girl had said she wanted him to remember. And now he did. He would never forget. The next few days passed, but the CEO couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with the little girl. Her words kept echoing in his mind. People who worked hard but got forgotten. He had faced criticism before. He had made difficult choices that others couldn't. But this felt different. It wasn't a stranger's opinion or a public remark. It was a reminder from a child who didn't even understand the full meaning of what she had said. He had built his company on logic, strategy, and competition. Every decision was weighed by numbers, not emotions. But now, behind those numbers, he saw faces, ordinary people who had once trusted his company for their future. For the first time, he felt something close to regret. That evening, he asked his assistant to bring him files from the time of the company merger years ago. When the documents arrived, he sat alone in his office and began to read through them. Page after page, names appeared, hundreds of them. People who had been part of the company for years, only to be let go when things changed. He wondered how many stories had ended because of his decisions. How many families had been affected. How many children, like that little girl, had quietly suffered because of something signed on his desk. He turned another page and suddenly stopped. There it was, a familiar name. The name of the little girl's mother. His pulse quickened as he read her employee record. She had worked in the customer relations department for nearly 10 years. Her performance reviews were full of praise. Dedicated, honest, hardworking, the kind of person every company needed. And yet, her name was on the list of those dismissed. For a moment he closed his eyes. He remembered that day clearly, the endless discussions, the charts, the financial projections. He remembered how quickly the names had been approved without even knowing who most of them were. Just numbers. Just paperwork. That was the day the company had saved money. But that same day she had lost her job. He leaned back in his chair, his heart heavy. It felt strange. How a simple song from a little girl had brought him here, face to face with something he had long buried under ambition. He ran a hand over his face, then opened his drawer. Inside lay a photo frame. A picture of his mother, smiling, her hand resting on the same piano he had played as a child. For the first time in years, he felt ashamed. The next morning, he drove himself to the old community center where the girls' school was located. It wasn't far from the city, but the streets were narrower, quieter. Children played outside the building, their laughter echoing through the air. When he stepped inside, the teachers looked surprised to see him. The principal hurried to greet him, but he raised a hand politely and said, "I just came to visit the school I've been supporting. Nothing official." He walked through the small classrooms, noticing the cracked walls, the faded paint, the desks that had been repaired countless times. Despite the simplicity, there was life here. Students smiling, teachers helping, a warmth that couldn't be bought. Then he saw her, the little girl, sitting at an old piano in one corner of the hall. She was practicing, her fingers carefully pressing the keys. The tune was different this time, lighter but still full of feeling. He stood silently at the doorway, watching her for a while before speaking. "You're getting better," he said gently. She turned quickly, her eyes widening. "Oh, sir, I didn't know you were here." He smiled faintly. "I wanted to see the school. And you?" She straightened up a little, brushing her hands against her dress. "I come here every day to practice," she said proudly. "My teacher says music helps people remember good things." He nodded. "She's right." She hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Did you find out about my mom?" He looked at her, unsure how to respond. "Yes," he said quietly. "I did. She worked very hard for the company. I'm sorry for what happened to her." The girl lowered her eyes. "It's okay," she whispered. She used to say everything happens for a reason. He wanted to say more, to explain, to apologize fully, but the words caught in his throat. What could he possibly say to make up for years of loss? The teacher walked over then, smiling politely. "She's been waiting for you," she said. "She hoped you might come." The CEO blinked in surprise. "Waiting for me?" "Yes," the teacher said gently. "She told me she wanted to play something for you again. She said it's her mother's other song." The girl nodded quickly. "It's the one she wrote when she got sick," she explained softly. "She said it was a song about hope." He nodded, his throat tight. "I'd love to hear it." The girl sat down at the piano again, her small hands resting on the keys. The hall was quiet except for the faint sound of children playing outside. Then she began to play. The music was soft, slower than the last song, but there was light in it, a feeling of peace mixed with sorrow. Each note seemed to float through the air like a memory, tender and full of love. Her eyes closed as she played, her face calm. She didn't just play with her fingers. She played with her heart. The CEO listened without moving. The melody filled the empty hall, wrapping around him like a whisper. It spoke of pain, loss, and forgiveness, but also of strength. It was the kind of music that didn't just pass through the ears. It settled deep inside the soul. When the song ended, the girl lifted her hands from the keys slowly. She looked up, searching his face. "Do you like it?" she asked. He nodded, unable to speak. His eyes glistened with emotion he couldn't hide. "It's beautiful," he said finally. "Your mother must have been a wonderful person." "She was," the girl said softly, smiling a little. "She always said that even when things go wrong, we should still be kind." The CEO looked down, his hands clasped together. She was right. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then the girl reached into her small bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This was her note," she said, holding it out. "I was supposed to give it to someone who reminded her of that song." He hesitated, then took it carefully. The paper was old, creased, and slightly faded. Inside, in neat handwriting, were just a few words. "If this song reaches you, it means you're still capable of feeling. Never forget. Kindness builds more than success ever will." He stared at the message, his heart pounding. His mother had said something similar to him once. And now, years later, those same words had found their way back to him. Through a child, through a song. He folded the note carefully and looked at the girl. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You don't know how much this means to me." She smiled shyly. "My mom said people only forget when they stop listening." He stood there, still holding the note, realizing how right she was. Somewhere along the path of ambition, he had stopped listening, to others, to his own heart, to the world outside his office walls. But now, through this little girl, he had heard again. When he left the school, the sun was setting behind the buildings. The sound of the piano drifted faintly through the open window as the girl continued to play. He paused, looking back one last time before getting into his car. As he drove away, he made a silent promise to himself. He would make things right, not through empty gestures or publicity, but through real change. The little girl's mother had worked with honesty, and she deserved to be remembered for that. The girl deserved a future her mother had dreamed of. The CEO didn't know yet how he would do it, but he knew one thing for sure. That melody had not only reminded him of the past, it had awakened something that had been sleeping for far too long. That night, the CEO couldn't sleep. He sat by the window of his penthouse, staring out at the city lights that sparkled like distant stars. Normally, those lights gave him a sense of pride, proof of how far he'd come, of the empire he had built from nothing. But now, they only reminded him of how much he had overlooked along the way. Every shining tower, every glowing street seemed to whisper the same thing. "You forgot the people who helped you get here." He picked up the folded note again and read it for what must have been the 10th time. "Never forget. Kindness builds more than success ever will." The words struck him deeply. They were so simple, yet they carried more truth than any business lecture or management book he'd ever read. He thought about the little girl's mother, the one who had worked hard, lost her job, and still taught her daughter to be kind. He realized that her strength, not his, was the kind that truly built something lasting. By morning, he had made up his mind. He arrived at the office early, earlier than anyone else, and sat quietly at his desk going through files. When his assistant came in, she found him surrounded by papers and notes. "Sir, you're here early," she said, surprised. He nodded. "There's a lot to fix," he replied calmly. "I've been thinking, we've made good profits over the years, but maybe we haven't done enough for the people who made it possible." She looked puzzled. "Do you mean the employees?" "Yes," he said firmly. "And their families. We'll start by reviewing the community programs we support. I want real impact this time, not just donations for good publicity. I want to rebuild trust." His assistant nodded slowly. "I'll arrange a meeting with the department heads." "Good," he said, then paused. "And also find out more about that community school. I want to help them properly. Renovate the building, supply better instruments, hire more teachers." Quietly, though. "No media." She hesitated. "Understood, sir. Should I tell them this came from the company?" He shook his head. "No. It's from someone who listened to a song and finally understood what it meant." The assistant didn't ask more questions. She had worked for him for years and had never seen him like this. Soft-spoken but determined, carrying an emotion that went beyond business. Over the next week, the CEO dedicated himself to change. He held meetings, reviewed old files, and reconnected with former employees who had been laid off years ago. Some of them were surprised, even cautious, when they received calls from his office. He met with a few personally, offering support not as a businessman trying to repair his image, but as a man trying to make things right. One afternoon, he sat across from a middle-aged woman who had once worked as an accountant in his company. She had been let go during the same restructuring as the little girl's mother. "I know this won't undo the past," he told her sincerely. But I'm trying to understand the people behind the decisions I made back then. The woman smiled faintly. It takes courage to even say that, she replied. Most people in your position wouldn't bother. He shook his head. It's not courage, he said quietly. It's overdue. Later that day, he visited the community school again. The renovation plan had already begun. Workers were repainting the walls, fixing the roof, and installing new furniture. The teachers greeted him warmly, their gratitude clear in their eyes, but he remained humble. This isn't charity, he said softly. It's an apology. The little girl was there too, sitting by the piano, her feet barely reaching the pedals. She waved at him with a bright smile. Sir, you came back. He smiled in return. Of course. I wanted to see how you're doing. She pointed proudly to the piano. They're getting new ones soon, but I'll still play this one. It was my mom's favorite. He walked closer and knelt beside her. Your mom must be very proud of you, he said gently. She nodded. I hope so. She always said if I play with love, she can hear it, even if she's not here. The CEO felt a lump in his throat. I think she's listening right now, he whispered. The girl smiled and began to play again. A soft, cheerful tune this time, full of innocence and hope. As the melody filled the room, the CEO stood silently, watching her small hands glide over the keys. It was like watching light after a long darkness. The sound was imperfect, but real, each note a reminder that life could still be beautiful, even after loss. That evening, he invited the school staff and the community leaders to a meeting. We'll set up a foundation, he said, dedicated to supporting families affected by layoffs and children who want to learn music. It will be named after her, your student's mother. The teacher gasped softly. That's incredibly generous of you. He shook his head. It's not generosity. It's gratitude. She taught her daughter something I had forgotten. That real success isn't measured by what you earn, but by what you give. The teacher's eyes glistened with emotion. She would have been touched to know that. In the following days, word quietly spread about the changes he was making. Employees noticed the shift in atmosphere. Meetings became more thoughtful, policies more humane. People began to speak of him differently, not as the cold, unreachable executive, but as someone who had rediscovered his humanity. And though he didn't seek praise, he felt lighter than he had in years. One evening, after a long day, he returned to his office and sat before his piano again. The city outside was calm, and the golden lights flickered like candles against the glass. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play. This time, he didn't fumble. The notes flowed naturally, steady and full of emotion. The same song that the little girl had played, the one her mother had taught her, now carried his own heartbeat within it. As he played, he imagined his mother's smile, the little girl's hopeful face, and the countless people who had crossed paths with him along the way. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly connected to them, to himself, to life. The next day, he returned to the school with a small surprise. In the corner of the main hall, a new piano stood. A beautiful grand piano, shining under the soft morning light. The children gathered around it, their eyes wide with wonder. The little girl ran up, her mouth open in awe. It's so big. Is it really for us? He smiled. Yes, for all of you. She touched the keys carefully, as if afraid to disturb it. It sounds like magic, she said softly. It's yours, he told her. Keep playing. Never stop. She looked up at him with a bright grin. I won't. I promise. Before he left, she called out, Sir, one day when I grow up, I'll play this song on a big stage. And I'll say it's for my mom, and for you. He turned, his eyes soft. Then I'll be there in the front row, he said with a smile. That night, as he walked home under the quiet city lights, the air felt different, gentler somehow. The noise of traffic faded behind him, replaced by a faint echo in his heart. It wasn't the sound of success or applause. It was the soft, lingering tune of a piano played by a little girl, reminding him that sometimes, the smallest songs carry the greatest truths. And for the first time in years, He felt at peace that a few months had passed since that unforgettable day at the community school. The once faded walls now gleamed with new paint, the classrooms had proper furniture, and the sound of laughter filled the halls. The new piano stood proudly on the small stage, polished and radiant, like a symbol of hope reborn. The foundation that the CEO had started quietly began to grow, touching the lives of many families who had once felt forgotten. But more than the buildings or the funds, something deeper had changed, both in him and in the people around him. The CEO's company, once known for its ruthless efficiency, now became known for its compassion. He made it a rule that every department must dedicate part of its workweek to community projects. The employees were hesitant at first, unsure if this was just another corporate trend, but soon, they began to see that he meant every word. He attended meetings differently now, he listened more, spoke less. When workers came forward with problems, he didn't dismiss them or delegate everything. He would often say, "Let's fix this together." It wasn't just business anymore. It was personal. His office piano had become his evening ritual. After long hours, he would sit quietly, close his eyes, and play the melody the little girl had taught him. It had become his way of grounding himself, reminding him of where he had been and what he had learned. One rainy evening, he received a letter at his office. The handwriting was uneven, clearly written by a child. It read, "Dear Sir, our school is having a small concert next week. It's my first time playing in front of everyone. I'm a little nervous, but I remember what my mom used to say, that when you play from your heart, the music will find its way to people's souls. I'll be playing the song you liked. I hope you can come. Your little friend." He smiled as he read it, his heart swelling with quiet emotion. Without a second thought, he cleared his schedule for that evening. When the day came, the hall was filled with parents, teachers, and children. There were decorations made from colorful paper, and the scent of fresh flowers drifted through the air. It wasn't a grand stage, but it carried warmth that no auditorium could match. The little girl spotted him as he entered and waved excitedly. She was dressed in a simple white dress, her hair tied neatly with a ribbon. The sight brought a soft smile to his face. He took a seat in the back row, not wanting to draw attention. The event began with short performances by the students, songs, poems, and short skits. The audience clapped cheerfully after each act. Then came the moment for the piano performance. The little girl stepped onto the small stage, her hands trembling slightly. Her teacher whispered something encouraging to her, and she nodded before sitting down at the piano. For a few seconds, the hall went quiet. Then she began to play. The same song her mother had written, the one about hope. The melody flowed through the air, pure and heartfelt. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. Every note carried love, loss, and courage. The sound of the piano filled the hall like a soft wave, washing over everyone present. The CEO sat there, completely still, as his eyes glistened. Around him, a few parents wiped away tears. Even the teachers stood silently, listening with their hearts instead of their ears. When the last note faded, the hall erupted in applause. The little girl stood, blushing but smiling brightly. Her eyes searched the room until they found him. He rose slowly and clapped, the sound echoing louder than any other. After the event, he waited quietly near the back door until she ran up to him, her face glowing with happiness. "You came," she said, breathless. "Of course I did," he said warmly. "I wouldn't miss it for the world. You played beautifully." She grinned shyly. "I was nervous at first, but then I remembered my mom's words, and yours too." He tilted his head. "Mine? Yes," she said confidently. "You said kindness builds more than success ever will. I think music is the same, it builds hearts." He smiled deeply, unable to find the right words. "You're wise beyond your years," he said softly. She laughed lightly. "That's what my teacher says too." He handed her a small wrapped box. "I brought you something." Her eyes widened. "Really? What is it?" "Open it," he said. Inside was a small silver pendant in the shape of a music note. On the back, engraved in neat letters, were the words, for the girl who reminded the world to listen. Her eyes shone with tears as she looked at it. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's yours," he said. "Keep it close. And whenever you doubt yourself, remember, you've already made the world better with your music." She hugged him tightly, surprising him. "Thank you," she murmured. He gently patted her back. "No," he said quietly. "Thank you." As he left the school that night, the sky had cleared, revealing a soft moon above the quiet streets. He walked slowly, listening to the faint echo of piano notes that still lingered in his memory. The world around him felt different now, not because the city had changed, but because he had. The cold distance that once defined him had been replaced by warmth and purpose. He no longer saw people as parts of a system or lines on a report. He saw them as stories, each one carrying its own melody. Weeks later, the foundation opened its first music scholarship program, allowing underprivileged children to learn instruments and perform. The CEO visited often, not as a figurehead but as a mentor. He would sit with the children, listen to them play, and even join in sometimes. One afternoon, a young boy asked him, "Sir, were you always this kind?" He chuckled softly. "No," he said honestly. "I had to learn, and a little girl was my teacher." The boy looked confused. "A little girl taught you?" "Yes," the CEO said, smiling. "She didn't use words. She used music." The story spread quietly through the city, inspiring others. Newspapers wrote about the transformation of the once hard-edged businessman who found his heart again through a child's song. But he didn't care about the recognition. What mattered most to him was the promise he had made, to never stop listening. Years later, when the little girl grew older, she kept her promise too. She became a music teacher, sharing the same lessons her mother had passed to her. And on her classroom wall hung a framed photo of her old piano, the one she had first played for the CEO. Beneath it, she had written a single line: "Music doesn't just heal hearts. It reminds them to feel again." The CEO, now older and slower, often visited her concerts. He would sit quietly in the back, smiling proudly as her students played. And every time the familiar melody filled the room, he felt the same warmth rise in his chest, the same feeling he had when he first heard it from a little girl in a worn-out school hall. He would close his eyes, letting the music wash over him. In those moments, there was no distance between wealth and poverty, success and struggle, only humanity. And as the final notes drifted away, he would whisper to himself, "Kindness really does build more than success ever will." Then he would smile, knowing that somewhere in that melody, the world had learned to listen again.